Good evening and welcome to this Sunday show, the only prime-time television broadcast explaining the Eastern European political turmoil to you. I'm Andrei Kulikov, and the major people in this studio tonight are Svitlana Zalishchuk, MP, and she, until recently, been a member of the biggest Ukrainian parliamentary faction, the Petro Poroshenko bloc, and another guest of equal importance, at least, is Pavlo Rizanenko, MP, who is currently a member of this political faction. We'll be talking about Crimea and the presidential elections, or presidential elections in Crimea. However, a equally important person has to be on Skype with us. This is Natalia Humeniuk from Hromadske. She is currently in Crimea. Do we have Natalia? Yes, she is here. Hello. I just can't imagine how it is for a Ukrainian journalist to be this day in Crimea, because it falls right between the 5th anniversary of the so-called referendum, where Crimeans were supposedly voting for to express their will to be within the Russian Federation. That was the anniversary was yesterday, and tomorrow there will be the anniversary of actually enacting this decision, which was adopted, of course, with the full presence of Russian troops in the Crimea. How do you feel today, Natalia?
So, Andrei and everybody, great to talk to you from here, and I think it's the must for the Ukrainian journalists to report from Crimea, not to think that it's the other people part of the land.
Well, anyway, we will soon restore the Skype connection. Yeah, she can talk now. Yeah.
Clearly important to express what's going on there. So we have the 4 days celebrations. They are official. Yesterday and the Monday would be the days off. So there is a huge part of the official celebration. However, what's interesting, today the occupied powers of Crimea, Sergei Aksyonov, for instance, we have heard that personally, don't at all ever remind that there was self-defense, that there was a will of Crimean people. There is very little presence of this in the public sphere. The most talks are about that everything had been done, the Crimea had been so-called saved by personal position of the Vladimir Putin, the Russian president. So, for instance, I've been to the event yesterday where there were these representatives. You'll see it in my report in quite a few minutes. That there were some people in uniforms, a lot of people coming from Moscow, to celebrate. But what they were saying that everything could be possible, the annexation of Crimea, they use the term the Crimean Spring, just because the Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, had been personally working on this special operation, and all the thanks are coming to the Russian troops. It's not a secret in the globally. However, it's a bit striking how open this message is there as well. There is a lot of military presence on the streets. Yet I won't say that there is kind of overall presentations. I think everybody is trying a bit to compare, had the things become for better and worse. Obviously, for some of the people, in particular pensioners and civil servants, and especially people moving from Russian to Crimea, maybe some salaries getting higher. However, I was sad. I've talked to really a lot of people of different political views. They admit that there are a lot of bureaucracy. There are a lot of issues with the, medicine, healthcare. It's incredibly expensive here. Obviously, the resort It's not any longer that touristic. However, we also should say that Crimea is not in the blockade. The banks are working. The people, especially the local authorities, the local occupying authorities, try to present that the Crimea, the situation is normal. For instance, it was visible for me, especially that a few Russian officials had come to Crimea during these days, but the most Crimean media was speaking about the visit of clearly a very much unknown person, one of the French former MPs who is running currently for European Parliament, Thierry Marini. And so everybody, he's come with a small delegation of pretty marginal politicians, but it's a huge sign. Everybody, if you look to the local media, to the Russian media, they try to really explain that, you see that there is international recognition, which says that this fact is very important.
Natalia, what about a more known person, the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin? I've read a couple of minutes ago that the Kremlin has officially said that he is going to be in Crimea tomorrow.
Yes, he would be in Crimea tomorrow. He will be in Sevastopol. He will be there on the ceremony. There were rumors, people are waiting for him. Yet that would be strange if he won't come, of course. And he's, it looks very, let's say, Soviet and official. So there are a lot of delegations, a lot of talks about that. So, of course, Vladimir Putin will be there. But I probably would like also to answer some of the questions on what's happening also with the people who are probably not much willing to speak. I think that it's very important to send this message that, of course, it's difficult for any journalist, also Western or Ukrainian or even a Russian, to work in Crimea, because a lot of people, not those who are politically engaged, but just general people, are pretty much concerned what would happen to them if they generally would be, let's say, not supportive to the government, to the Russian government. So we're speaking about, for instance, small business who's saying that, we really understand that to say that we are not satisfied would be quite risky. I also should say that, of course, there is a big story which is currently, let's say, not hidden, but people prefer not to talk. It's the story of the political prisoners. So we're speaking about up to 70 people. 40 of them are Crimean Tatars accused of extremism or terrorism. They are normal people. There are fabricated cases. And what we also feel that a lot of people here, they understand that it's happening. So there could be some kind of innocent people arrested, and the people are concerned, so they prefer not to talk about that. But they kind of majority of the people try to pretend that it's not happening, that these kind of political repressions are not taking place. But it's important to mention that in modern world, there is a very obvious picture of the celebration on the streets. And yes, they're happening. But the biggest part of the story here is really this kind of a normal life of a normal people, which kind of different, which is difficult, not easy. And there are... and you really need to follow the personal stories of many people.
My last question to Natalia Humeniuk is, have you seen any signs of dissent among those who go to those gatherings?
It's interesting because there are very different. I started with the saying that these people who were super active ideologically in 2014, let's say people who pretend to name themselves as self-defense, they kind of moved away from the discourse because there is just the state, there is just Putin, there are just Russian troops, so they felt that they are not fully represented. I think we shouldn't really search for, very proactively search for the people who would say it was better or worse. We constantly meet the people who say that the things get worse. There is a very poor healthcare system. There is a very kind of huge bureaucracy. There are, of course, we have kind of a new bridge, we have a new airport, but the business is not like that. So I think if it's to compare those things, it's very difficult for a lot of people. They're saying that it's kind of no way thing if you just constantly would like compare how was it before, how is it after. For most of the people, I think like the most of the people we talk to, and the people we talk to who say about the other people, that they understand that things are definitely not good. It's like coming to the 90s. It's not even like coming back to the Soviet times. It's like coming back to early 90s in the post-Soviet space when there is a semi-legal system, there is a smuggling, there are some kind of, despite the Russia is a state of the order, that, there are issues with banking system. It's not really free. It could be dangerous. It could be criminal. So, but people understand that at this stage, they just need to survive and not to show any political affiliation. And if you show any kind of sign of the political affiliation, then maybe that would be dangerous. What we also understood that, for instance, the families of the political prisoners, for a while it was believed that the women won't be touched. However, now there is an issue when even the women could be kind of questioned. But what is kind of the biggest issue is like this issue of the political prisoners or people who have some dissent. They have to be very silent. They have to speak to each other, and as well, all the kind of machine is trying to show them as if they are not existing, as if they are marginal, as if they are not important.
Thank you very much, Natalia Hromadske. Take care and come here because we need you both there and here. We come back to the Kyiv studio for a while because you might have seen a footage of what Natalia was filming in the Crimea these days, and we'll now see her report, and then both our guests will comment on what they've seen, and we will talk about presidential elections.
Встрепенулся перьями, и с высоты советского герба увидел он, что в новую империю ведет страну народная судьба.
A blend of Russian and Soviet coats of arms. Beneath it is the Russian flag that was handed over by Vladimir Putin to Russian motorcycle club leader Alexander Zalishchuk in 2009 to bring to Sevastopol. This flag is being raised using a metal construction. The process is accompanied by the sound of the Soviet national anthem. A creation of a new Fifth Empire is declared. A Russian empire, of course.
И тянем за собою нашу родину в империю на сцепленных зубах. И услан путь несметными потерями, но ввысь, взмывая гербовым орлом, встаем над миром пятою империей и салютуем бывшим четырем.
This is how the 5th anniversary of the Crimean annexation is marked here. Only they call it the Crimean Spring or the Black 100 Day. The so-called militia, people wearing notorious Berkut riot police uniforms, cars flying the Donetsk People's Republic's flags, and even people wearing Novorossiya insignia. We also see a flag bearing a portrait of Ahmad Kadyrov, the father of the Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov. Chechen food is served here too. Some posters say, "We don't care about the sanctions." We meet the members of the so-called Crimean self-defense group here. They recognize themselves in the hanging pictures dating to March 2014 and show where exactly they stood at the checkpoints.
Я днем ждали 17 числа, после референдума, ждали ветеранов, когда нам грамоты вручали ветеранам.
Написано «Гвардия Севастополя». Я стою еще сейчас. Нет. Вот этот чаловский знак. Мне он очень дорог. А вот. Ну, это третий оборот. Ну, это что, крымский еще вот это такое дело.
Подожди, это... Севастополь. Тоже 14-й год, да?
Да.
Ой, а расскажите нам, что вы тогда делали? Вот
На мосту стоял,
на каком?
Орловском.
А.
Первое время. Потом ВМС, штаб военно-морских сил Украины блокировали. А потом уже в 13-й роте. А 13-я рота стояла на площади Нахимова. Каждый день какие-то мероприятия проходили. Мне сейчас больше нравится время, чем советское.
Вот сестра, у нее медаль есть за, ну, в общем, медаль, да, Крыма. А сестра чем занималась? Она работала в Феодосии на военной базе, но она там и работает на базе российского флота Черноморского. Понятно, у вас семья боевая. Да. Нет, ну она просто работает на этом базе, давали. А вообще, там, моих у многих знакомых сыновья были в ополчении, имеют медали, так что настрой Феодосии, настрой очень такой патриотичный.
These so-called celebrations will last 4 days in Crimea, from March 15th to March the 18th. The 16th and the 18th were declared national holidays in Russia, the 16th being the day of the so-called referendum, and the 18th being the day Russia annexed Crimea. On these days, there are celebratory events all over the peninsula. For example, in Yalta, we saw little kids, first graders, being accepted into the Junior Guard. And they swore by it. The Junior Guard being the organization launched in Russia a couple of years ago with the aim to raise children in a patriotic way. A host of Russian officials have arrived in Crimea. For example, the chairman of the Russian parliament, Vyacheslav Volodin. He stated that before 2014, Crimea was under Ukrainian occupation. The leader of Russia's Liberal Democratic Party, Vladimir Zhirinovsky, is also here. But the most attention in the Crimean media was received by the arrival of some former French lawmakers. Because the presence of any former European politicians, even if they held little power or were marginalized, is highlighted using all means. But the strangest thing happening here, an anti-utopian event, you can say, is happening here on the Gosford mountain, which serves the base to the Night Wolves motorcycle club members. A large group of them from Simferopol, Sevastopol and also from various cities in Russia came today to bring what they call the biggest Russian flag ever. Of course, this Russian Spring started for us back in 2009, Zaldostanov tells us, when the flag provided by the president came to this city. Come along, everyone, you can all take part in the unfolding of our flag. A Russian flag, the biggest Russian flag, had arrived here. We will do it all together, practically in 5 minutes.
Был зафиксирован и занесен в Книгу рекордов России и мира как самый большой флаг Российской Федерации, представленный в воздушном пространстве. И вот теперь этот флаг прибыл в Севастополь на гору Госфорда и будет развернут здесь в честь 5-летия русской весны.
Probably not too many people here in attendance, but the key faces behind the events from 5 years ago are here, including Sergei Aksyonov, the leader of Crimea's occupant government. His speech was a short one, but he said one main thing. The Russian President Vladimir Putin personally conducted the operation, which was brazen and bold.
И ничего бы этого не получилось, если бы наш президент Владимир Владимирович Путин лично не руководил этой операцией и не принимал лично решения, от которого зависели судьбы крымчан и севастопольцев. Решения президента спасли нам жизнь. На самом деле, то есть то, что было сделано, это уникальная операция, поскольку действительно все это произошло настолько быстро, дерзко, нагло, что наши оппоненты не успели опомниться.
The expected arrival of Vladimir Putin to the Nakhimov Square in Sevastopol on March the 18th, which is being discussed by many here, may potentially become another culmination of the events taking place here.
So 5 years of annexation, 5 years of occupation, and the myth about saving Russian lives is still there. However, we have to look forward, and one of the issues that people say is being either neglected or shadowed during Ukrainian presidential elections is the fate of Crimea and how Ukraine would be able to get it back. So my question to our guests, both are MPs and both are rather active in political life in Ukraine, is how satisfied are you with the level the Crimean issue is represented in what Ukrainian presidential candidates say and do? Svitlana Zalishchuk, MP, will start.
I'm not satisfied, neither by the level of the presence of this issue in Ukraine, nor by the level of the discussion on the international level, because I believe it has to be a joint effort. And we've seen today that there have been a couple of the resolutions done by US State Department, EU, we expect tomorrow, I think, resolution on Crimea, with unrecognition of Russian annexation. But unrecognition is not enough. Unrecognition is a passive word. And we need proactive efforts, both, I will underline both, from Ukrainian power, but also by international community. I can give a couple of examples. What can it be? Of course, at the moment, we can't send army, I don't know, invite NATO to deoccupy Crimea. But there are things that we can actually do, and I think must do. For example, there is a legal so-called free economic zone with Crimea, which allows certain Ukrainian oligarchs, businessmen, to have trade with Crimea, but in fact they have like a free zone of trade with Russia. And it has been legalized by Ukrainian parliament and has been changed since then. And I remember that 2 years ago, when we were adopting the legislation on the so-called deoccupation, and the leader of the Crimean Tatars, Mr. Chubarov, in the parliament, it was his ultimatum that we need to adopt this new legislation and to cancel free economic zone, because it's unfair, basically, because we ask the whole world to put sanctions on Crimean business, on companies that are trading with Crimea. At the same time, we're creating a special free zone to have a trade between Ukraine and Crimea. And it's still there, but and unfortunately, it has been cancelled. Why? Because certain very concrete businessmen are beneficiaries of that legislation.
Do those concrete businessmen support any of the presidential candidates, and do they influence the state of the discussion of this issue?
Not publicly, at least. Of course, we won't hear their voice that, hey, let's support this economic zone, because it would be very legitimate in the society to have such a discussion. But I'm sure that they make a lot of efforts to keep this free economic zone with Crimea. And Mr. Firtash, by the way, is one of those people that still enjoys this free economic zone, and his Titan factory is enjoying this specific trade relations between Ukraine and Crimea.
Thank you, Ms. Zalishchuk. Mr. Rizanenko, do you see any of the candidates, presidential candidates, as people who pay enough attention to the Crimean issue?
Whoever says, we will not be satisfied and we will not be happy until Russian troops and Russia is out of Crimea. I mean, any kind of discussion is, we will not be happy about that. So that's my first point that I would emphasize. And we see, as was said, that there is no short-term military solution to this issue at all. And particularly also with our Western partners, you know, they always say, let's concentrate on Donbass first, and then let's talk about Crimea later. And it's one thing which is said publicly, and another which is said behind the closed doors. And they say, no, guys, we will not go for war with Russia because of Crimea, because of you. So it's more viewed by all participants, so by political participants in Ukraine, as a more long distance problem that has to be resolved in future perspective. With regard to economic ties or whatever trade, it's minimized. I'm not quite sure what kind of economic free trade zone you are talking about. I'm very much into titanium, understanding of this titanium situation. I followed it, and I fought as a deputy head of specialized Privatization Control Commission for taking back assets from Mr. Firtash back into the government custody, particularly titanium ore mining plants, and that was completed back in 2014. Mr. Firtash basically doesn't sell it formally to Crimea. He sells his ore from Ukraine to Turkey, and then via Turkey, formally legally via Turkey, that is delivered through Russia to Crimea. But that's particularly on that one issue. So I'm not satisfied with the discussions by the politicians about this one. Moreover, it's more about our internal, more present, more current issues. That's what is discussed now, but that's probably we'll discuss in the other half of the program. Just on the notice, I saw that Medjlis, they support running president formally. They made a decision to support him, and they were always, in the past elections, before occupation, they were supporting Ruch and Western-oriented parties in Ukraine. That was always their stance in elections.
All right. Dear parliamentarians, what were the biggest unexpected things that happened to you during this presidential election campaign? Or, for me, for instance, an unexpected, although a long-awaited event was Ms. Zalishchuk and two other deputies leaving the faction of the bloc of Petro Poroshenko. So we won't discuss this, but still, what were the unexpected things that were happening during the election campaign? And this time, Mr. Rizanenko will start.
For me, it's vote against, involvement of part of the some voters which never were active in elections, in any kind of elections. My observation that thanks to new communication ways, social media and so on, they are more involved in pre-election process. It's much easier to click and share and repost something than go to the poll station, or to participate in giving out leaflets or being member of poll station and so on. So I saw that many people are involved into the, at least through social media, in the elections, and they are, I would say, more emotion-driven, less reason-driven, more emotion-driven, and that's my assessment how we see that high percentage rating of Mr. Zelensky in the, for now, because on the election day it might be a very different picture, because clicking and sharing something in Facebook is very much different from getting up and going to the poll station and voting. So that's a surprise, and I think it will be a surprise on the election day. But
so do you believe that the fate of the election will be actually decided again between Mr. Poroshenko and Ms. Tymoshenko?
I would say that in our situation, we are a democracy, unlike Russia, where you know for sure who will win. I would say that no one can tell you who will be in the runoff now. I think that
but there will be a runoff. Unlike 2014, there will be a runoff.
unlike 2014, there will be a runoff. And I think that 3-4 candidates, they have chances to be in the runoff.
Thank you. Ms. Zalishchuk.
I agree, first of all, that at the moment it's impossible to say about the results. And we still have to pay attention on those 30% that are undecided, and they will decide.
I hear this every time, and every time it doesn't work.
It can work. What I'm saying, it can work. Given the current situation and possible positive, negative trends can really change the people's mindset on the last moment. It can happen. So let's be aware of that and let's just respect this possibility, right? This first thing. And with regards to unexpected things, Pasha focused on more positive things, right? And
there are always positive and negative.
So probably I'll play a role of the balance here. And for me, unexpected things that I didn't want to expect. It was difficult to believe in 2014 when we were run into the parliament that we will still have voter bribings. Still after Euromaidan, after a country that lost Crimea and lost, well, Donbass and Crimea are occupied, Crimea is annexed, and when we talking about undemocratic regime, but we are witnessing most undemocratic practices during this political campaign, and it hurts me. Also, what was unexpected is creation of these so-called Setka networks, of the control networks with the particular voter bribing, right, with the money, with payments from the central level to the local level, and we observed that also from a couple of candidates, and in particular Setka, which is created by Petro Poroshenko, the current president, and I think it's also kind of unexpected thing. And the last thing which I didn't expect to happen is also the use of administrative resources. The so-called monetization, which is a positive phenomenon and a positive reform, right? But it's happening just on the election month, and also this so-called special help or assistance, you know, to more poor groups, social groups in the regions, is also a hard use of administrative resource. And we understand that votes are being bought again. And this is not what I would like to see in a democratic country.
What do you make of the activization of some right-wing paramilitary groups prior to the election? We've been witnessing this for the last week or so.
Well, first of all, it's probably important to analyze why does it happening, and then we have to talk about what can we do in order to avoid or prevent their influence on the election process, because I see it as a challenge to the democratic elections, for sure. And I think that it is up to the law enforcement bodies and up to the prosecution to react to all those problems that exist during the political campaign, so that it's not being given to the paramilitary groups to react to those. But why it's happening? There is a explanation, and I see that the loyal prosecution and very often law enforcement bodies just don't react to legitimate concerns that are there and legitimate facts of corruption and violation of the electoral law and so on. So that's why we deal with it. And certain people, even like pro-democratic, pro-European people, find the arguments to justify these events. I can't find the arguments to justify, because it will lead us to chaos. It will lead us to, military, country when the weapon and anarchism will decide the fate of the country. I wouldn't like it to happen.
And there is quite some talk about that these activizations seemingly aimed against the current president are actually organized by him and his team in order to give him a pretext to use some extraordinary measures prior to the elections. What do you say, Mr. Rizanenko?
Could you clarify your question, please?
Well,
I didn't quite get it.
In many cases, people who have real power, like the Ukrainian president has, organize some events which are seemingly against them to give them a pretext to use extraordinary measures.
Okay, one by one, starting with the last question. Surely the incumbent president is in different situation than other candidates, because he is a candidate and at the same time he is a president. And you cannot get away from this, but as a president, he definitely has to do, it's his obligation to do his job. And surely these are important things, and these important things are highlighted and broadcasted and are talked about. So,
and for some reason they couldn't have been done before.
Wait a second, but we are not talking about president stopping doing his job during the election process. It never happens in any country. It doesn't matter what the name of the current president is. Would it be some other president? We will have the same conversation that incumbent president has some kind of advantage. This is just the setup that we have in any situation in any country. Acting incumbent president in the US, in whatever country, has this advantage. You cannot get away from it. But I would return to some and would like to comment on some things. When we talk about undecided voters and sociology, polls, and so on, it's very interesting that when they do polls, look at all of them, and about 90%, 85, 90% of people, they say that they will come and vote. The reality is different. And these numbers, like that 90% of people will come and vote, this opinion is reflected in the polls. But the reality is that turnout at the elections, 60% is very high. The last elections, they were like 59%. Parliamentary election, 54 or 55%. So definitely in these polls reflect opinion of some people that say that they will come, but they will not come. And that will be a big surprise on the election day, because voters for Poroshenko, Tymoshenko, Gritsenko, and Zelensky, they differ to some extent. In terms of will they come or they will not come. So I see that there will be surprising numbers, definitely. The favorite candidates for polls will have less votes on the election day because his base are youngsters and they poorly come to the elections. And I see that some other candidates, not a single candidate, but some other candidates might have some higher numbers that are reflected in the polls. Historically, it was always the case that Tymoshenko's election base is in rural areas, in villages, and pollsters made the mistakes in the past where they would not reflect that in the polls. It's harder to get there, you know, just from organizational standpoint of view. So she might have higher vote than reflected in the polls to some degree. Then I would like to reflect on buying up votes and so on. I had like 6 campaigns before, and on practical terms, running as a candidate, running the headquarters, regional headquarters, and so on. And there is always a lot of talk about buying votes. You know, every election we talk about this, that some candidates organize buying votes. The discussion about this is over-exaggerated, and work of headquarters for many candidates on mobilizing their election base, doing their, whatever, let's bad word, propaganda, but whatever, information work on the local level.
The word is okay.
Pardon?
The word is okay. Propaganda
the word
is
okay.
bad.
But basically, when they talk about Setka and what they try to represent as Setka for buying votes, is not for buying votes. It's for finding supporters, identifying them, and getting their commitment to vote pledge. It's a normal practice in every country. If you take a textbook for running elections, and in the US, what they do, they identify candidates. They identify candidates who will vote for their candidate and get a pledge, a signed paper in the US, actually, that they promise to vote for this candidate, they support this candidate, and then there are calls, SMS messages, and so on to mobilize them pre-election day, on election day, and so on.
I remember a cartoon on the front page of Spectator magazine in the UK, where a person representing John Major was standing on the threshold of a usual British household, and there was a lady listening to him, and he said, "If you don't vote for me, I will hit you on the head with this hammer.
Bad propaganda.
That's getting the pledge.
But let me finish this point. So it's normal that if you organize a campaign, you have people that go around, poll people, put them on page and say, okay, this one will vote, this will vote against, and so on. So you have your support base list of your supporters, and you mobilize them. And that work is done by this, whatever that you call Siatka, but it's a network of, you call them volunteers that organize this work. I don't see actually...
I'm talking about different Siatka, but you'll finish, and I would like to comment on this.
So what I see that several candidates, the major ones, they are doing their job, but they are accusing each other. It goes both ways. It goes in both directions. That those networks of agitators, whatever you call them, are created to buy up votes.
Of course,
but
and by
it's a little bit different.
By accusing one another, they are doing their job as well.
But let me finish, because I want to be very specific and I want to have professional discussion, not populistic discussion. What happened in 2014, we changed the law a bit, where we said that paying those agitators is illegal. It's prohibited, not illegal, but prohibited. It's prohibited. So many campaign runners, they can hardly find people doing this job for free. And in many instances, they still are trying to find a way to pay people working in these regional headquarters and so on, doing this job. So it goes both ways. Several candidates accuse each other that this is illegal, but they try to misrepresent, buying up votes and paying their agitators.
Okay, we are swiftly running out of time, but there's still at least a minute for Ms. Zalishchuk.
I think that we underestimate how network is working. And I'm talking about illegal payments with a mobile group from the so-called parallel headquarters of Bloc Poroshenko that are bringing money on the regional level, on the district level, and so on. I have a whistleblower from Bloc Petra Poroshenko headquarters that explain of how it's working and having these parallel headquarters and operating with this money, bringing them from Kyiv to the districts. And we are talking about millions and millions of hard cash, which is illegal cash. And I think it's a very impactful factor on these elections, which can't be accepted in a democratic country.
I invite you to my election district, which is very close,
Pasha,
25 minutes from here.
I believe you, I trust you, but I don't think that your experience, I don't think that your experience can be extrapolated on the Bloc Petra Poroshenko campaign.
And now we will share an experience of having 30 seconds for the assessment of the role of media in these elections. Who would want to start? Mr. Rizanenko, are you satisfied, or how satisfied or dissatisfied are you with the election coverage in Ukrainian media?
I'm trying to find unbiased media that would provide, hard facts and information, but my assessment that most medias, they are just favoring one or another candidate, and we are just having information wars. Not fair coverage, but information wars. Some media are on one side, on one candidate side, another media on another candidate. You turn on TV on one channel and you see negative information, only positive about one candidate and negative about the other. You turn on another channel and you see, quite opposite thing. Major media, major 4 channels with huge coverage, they are owned by oligarchs. We haven't got away from it, and they are using that for their purpose, whatever.
Thank you, Ms. Zalishchuk.
I think we have full consensus in this room with regards to the definition of the problem with media. But I think we have to talk also of how to solve it. And I think that the problem is with the Commission, National Commission on TV and Radio, that is not doing their job properly. And I also think that that public broadcasting system that is being killed by the underfinancing, only 50%, I think it's a responsibility of the current government, which I think it's a big problem. And I think we also have to think of how demonopolize the influence of oligarchs on the TV media. And it's one of the challenges for the next power, whoever is there.
Well, you've seen and you heard that there are quite significant differences about what both MPs said, but also there are some points on which they agree, and that, I think, is good. This is competition, rivalry, but not the war that some of them are talking about, and that many candidates are engaged in, and they try to drag voters in these wars. If you want to know more about Ukrainian presidential elections and, of course, about their outcome, stay with Hromadske International. I just want to thank Ms. Zalishchuk, MP, and Mr. Rizanenko, MP, for taking part in this broadcast. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook, and see you again.